Hey, so today we're diving into 2 Samuel chapters 8 and 9, and wow, there's a lot packed in here. We'll see King David on the rise, winning battles and expanding his kingdom, but also showing mercy in some surprising ways. And then there's the story of Mephibosheth, which honestly is kind of beautiful and unexpected. We'll explore how God guides David, protects him, and even uses these moments to show mercy. Stick around. It's a story that really makes you think. Alright, so let's set the stage here. We're early into David's reign as king, and things are actually going really well for him and for Israel. I mean, we're talking about a period of real rest. The enemies around Israel had been subdued, and the nation was finally at peace for a bit. And during this time, David's heart was really focused on something big, bringing the presence of God into the center of the nation in a permanent way. You see, the Ark of the Covenant, which is this incredible symbol of God's presence, had already been brought to Jerusalem, but it didn't have a permanent home yet. It had been kind of wandering around like a sacred trophy without a house. And David really wanted to change that. Now, if you followed along, you might remember that David's first attempt to bring the ark didn't exactly go smoothly. Things got a little messy, seriously. It was not a small ordeal, but the second attempt way better. It went smoothly, and it really showed David's heart and intention. He wanted God's presence to dwell with his people in a settled, honored place. And this is where it gets interesting, because David wasn't just thinking about the logistics or the ceremony. He had this real desire to build a temple, a permanent house for God, where the ark could rest forever. That's a big deal. It's kind of like he was saying, God, you deserve a home, not just a temporary stopover. But here's where the story takes a twist. God sends Nathan, the prophet, to David with a message. And oh, I love this part because it's kind of counterintuitive. Nathan tells David, "You're not going to build this temple." Wait. What? Yeah, I know. That's not what David wanted to hear. But the reason is really profound. God explains that David has been a warrior his whole life. He's fought battles, shed blood, led armies, and all of that is part of God's plan for him. But it also means that the time to build a house of peace isn't David's job. God wants someone who embodies peace to do that. The temple is going to be built by David's son, Solomon. And if you pay attention, the name Solomon actually comes from the Hebrew root word shalom, which means peace. So it's intentional. It's not just a family succession thing, it's a divine design where the man of peace builds the permanent house of God. But don't get me wrong, David's reaction is interesting. He doesn't throw a tantrum, doesn't pout or argue. He takes it in stride, which says a lot about his character. He accepts God's plan, and even though he can't physically build the temple himself, he plays a huge role in preparing for it. He gathers resources, accumulates wealth, and even comes up with architectural plans. Essentially, he lays the groundwork so that when Solomon comes into the picture, everything is ready for the temple to be built properly. It's kind of like he's the project manager from behind the scenes, making sure the vision is fully realized even if he's not the one hammering the nails. And here's the thing that's really striking David's heart in all of this. He's not bitter. He's not jealous that his son will do what he dreamed of doing. Instead, he's grateful to be part of the story, to contribute what he can, and to honor God in the process. You can almost feel his humility. David recognizes that it's not about his glory, it's about God's glory. And that's a lesson, honestly. Sometimes we think our plans or our visions are the most important thing, but David shows us that obedience and alignment with God's timing matter even more. So, while we move from chapter 7 into chapter 8, we see a bit of a transition in David's life. He's at a point of rest after battles. He's got this incredible heart for God, and he's fully submitted to the divine plan, even when it doesn't line up exactly with his personal desires. And just to paint the picture a little more vividly, imagine David in Jerusalem, standing there, looking at the ark, thinking about a future temple, and planning in his mind how it's all going to come together. It's kind of inspiring because it shows a mix of vision, faith, and humility. He's celebrating the present victory and also anticipating God's future work. And you know what? This moment sets the tone for everything that follows in the next chapters. Because David's not just resting, he's preparing, he's thinking strategically, and he's putting everything in place to honor God. Even though he's a warrior, even though he's led armies and fought battles, he has this tender heart for the Lord, and he wants to see God's presence fully honored among his people. That's the essence of David's early reign, a man of courage, a warrior on the battlefield, but also a man deeply in love with God's presence, thinking ahead and trusting God's plan to unfold in the perfect timing. Okay, so now we get to some really intense action in 2 Samuel chapter 8, and honestly, it's kind of fascinating because David isn't just sitting back enjoying peace, he's on the offensive. And I mean, this isn't just a little skirmish. We're talking about strategic campaigns across multiple nations. Right after a period of rest, David doesn't just pat himself on the back and relax. No, he decides to secure his kingdom even further. And there's a lot to unpack here, so hang with me. First, we see David dealing with the Philistines. He attacks them and subdues them, which, isn't surprising considering the Philistines had been enemies for a long time. But what's interesting is how deliberate and calculated David is. This isn't just random fighting, there's a purpose, a plan, and it's not just about defeating enemies for the sake of conquest. David is looking at the bigger picture, strengthening Israel, securing borders, and on top of that, repurposing the spoils of war for God's glory. I know, right? It's like he's thinking both short-term and long-term at the same time. Everything he gains from these battles isn't just treasure for himself, it's for building and furnishing the future temple. Even though he won't build it himself, he's laying the groundwork in a tangible way. Gold, silver, bronze, all of it. He's gathering to honor God. Then David moves against the Moabites. Now, this is a bit more complex because Moab had been relatively peaceful towards David at one point. Remember when he was running from King Saul, David had actually sent his parents to Moab for safety. And the Moabites provided shelter. So you might be wondering, why turn aggressive now? Well, the text isn't super clear on the exact reason, but the narrative shows David being thorough. He doesn't just leave potential threats simmering. The scripture says he measured the Moabites with lines, deciding who would live and who would be put down, which is a pretty brutal image. Some scholars interpret this literally, that 2/3 of them were killed, while the surviving third became servants and paid tribute. Basically, it's a message you're either part of this kingdom and its peace, or, well, you're not. It's harsh, but it shows David's commitment to fully securing his territory and creating stability for Israel. Next, we have the campaigns against Syria, particularly Hadadezer, the king of Zobah. David's advancing toward the Euphrates River, which, geographically speaking, is a big deal. I mean, the text says he's recovering territory, but here's the interesting part: the Israelites had never actually occupied the full stretch of land promised to Abraham. That promise in Genesis 15:18 spans from the Nile to the Euphrates. So David's campaign isn't just about expansion for the sake of conquest. It's about reclaiming what God had intended for his people. And this expansion is massive. David grows the kingdom from roughly 6,000 square miles to around 60,000. To put that in perspective, today, modern Israel is only about 8,700 square miles. So David's reign marked the largest territory Israel ever held. It's incredible to think about, especially considering the geopolitical pressures at the time. Now, the numbers in these campaigns are pretty staggering. Against Hadadezer, David captures 1,000 chariots, 700 horsemen, and 20,000 foot soldiers. And here's a detail that really sticks out: he hamstrung the chariot horses, leaving just enough to man 100 chariots. That's strategic thinking. He's neutralizing potential future threats while still keeping enough capacity for his own military needs. And that level of planning, the foresight, it's impressive. You can tell David wasn't just relying on brute force. He was thinking carefully about how to maintain control and security over his kingdom. Then we have the Syrians of Damascus who came to help Hadadezer. David defeats 22,000 of them, yeah, you heard that right, 22,000. Afterward, he sets up garrisons in the region, and the Syrians also become servants, paying tribute. Again, it's about consolidating power, not just fighting battles. And throughout all these campaigns, there's a recurring theme that really stands out in the text: the Lord preserved David wherever he went. That phrase is repeated multiple times, and it's more than just a throwaway line. The Hebrew word used there, yesha, means to keep safe, to protect. Wherever David went, God was with him. And that's huge. It's not just military skill, it's divine guidance and protection that ensures victory. David's success isn't solely his own, it's God working through him. And as he conquers, David doesn't just take the land, he takes the treasures. Shields of gold from Hadadezer's servants, bronze from cities like Beta and Berothai. These resources are all brought to Jerusalem, and again, there's this clear, deliberate connection. The plunder of war is redirected to honor God. It's a remarkable example of repurposing what was meant for destruction into something constructive and sacred. And here's another layer: other kings like Toi of Hamath see what David is doing and react strategically. Toi sends his son with gifts to David, essentially acknowledging David's strength and seeking peace. It's fascinating to see these geopolitical dynamics unfolding, almost like a chess game. David is expanding his kingdom, securing tribute, building alliances, and all of it contributes to his ultimate goal of honoring God. By the end of these campaigns, David is not just a king of Israel, he's a recognized force in the region. He's creating a reputation that can't be ignored. But what's key here is that throughout all of this, his victories aren't just about personal glory. They're tied directly to God's plan and presence. The resources he gathers will eventually support the temple, and his strategic victories secure the land promised by God. It's a mix of divine guidance, careful planning, and bold action. Even the details about measurement, tribute, and garrisons all highlight a structured approach to leadership. David isn't just swinging a sword randomly, he's administering justice, ensuring that conquered peoples are integrated in a way that maintains peace and order. The tribute systems, the garrisons, the strategic hamstringing of chariot horses, it all shows a mind for practical governance, not just military triumph. And throughout, we see that repeated phrase, "The Lord preserved David wherever he went," which keeps reminding us that God's hand is actively involved. This isn't luck, and it isn't just military genius. It's God protecting, guiding, and enabling David in everything he does. And think about the psychological aspect too. The plunder, the treasures, the expansion. It's all really tangible evidence to the people of Israel that God is with David. The victories aren't abstract. They're seen in territory gained, in security established, in wealth redirected to God's purposes. And that must have been inspiring. The people could see not only the military might, but also the divine favor upon their king. It builds confidence, loyalty, and a sense of destiny for the nation as a whole. One other thing that's worth noting is the human element. David was ambitious. Yes, but his ambition was tempered by reverence for God and a bigger plan. He could have used the spoils for personal enrichment, but instead, he channels them to honor God. He could have become content with rest and peace, but he presses forward to secure the kingdom fully, aware of the threats and the responsibilities of leadership. That balance between personal ambition, strategic foresight, and spiritual humility is really striking and gives a lot of depth to his character. So, as we wrap up this section, what we see in 2 Samuel 8 is David as a warrior king who's disciplined, strategic, and deeply guided by God. He subdues the Philistines, Moabites, Syrians, and others. He repurposes plunder for God's temple. He expands Israel to its largest borders ever. He's protected and guided by God at every step, which is explicitly stated in the scripture. And through all of this, we see a leader who's balancing military prowess with reverence, strategy with spiritual purpose, and ambition with obedience. That's the picture that emerges, and it really sets the stage for the next chapters, where God's mercy, guidance, and David's own legacy continue to unfold in remarkable ways. Alright, so moving on. One of the things that really stands out in this part of David's story is how he made himself a name. And I mean that literally, the scripture says it. After defeating huge armies, expanding his territory, and establishing dominance over multiple nations, David earned a reputation that people couldn't ignore. And here's the thing, a good name. A strong reputation, that matters. I mean, think about it. Proverbs 22, one even says a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. It's that important. Now, to really bring this home, let me tell you a little story that puts it into perspective. You might have heard the phrase, your name is Mud, right? Well, that actually comes from a real historical figure, Dr. Samuel Mudd. Back in 1865, after Abraham Lincoln was shot, John Wilkes Booth fled and ended up at Dr. Mudd's house to get his broken leg set. The problem was, Mudd's name got associated with the assassination, and even though he maintained his innocence for the rest of his life, his reputation was ruined. Instantly, his name became synonymous with infamy. And that's the contrast with David. He's building a legacy, a name that carries weight, respect, and honor, not shame. It's a good reminder that our actions, choices, and integrity shape how others see us and how history remembers us. For David, this reputation wasn't just about egos, it was practical. His name carried authority. People knew not to mess with him. And that influence was crucial because a king's word and decisions impacted an entire nation. So when the Bible says David made himself a name, it's not just about personal glory. It's about creating a reputation that commanded respect and encouraged obedience in a way that allowed him to lead effectively. And it wasn't only about military success. David also administered justice. He reigned over Israel, yes, but he also ensured that judgment was fair and right. People knew that under his leadership, things were done honorably, in alignment with God's standards. That's important because it shows that strength and power were balanced with wisdom and integrity. A strong reputation isn't built just on victories. It's built on how a leader treats people, how they enforce laws, and how they navigate both victory and challenge with fairness. When you look at David's leadership qualities, a pattern emerges. He's decisive, strategic, and courageous in battle, but he's also thoughtful and measured. He takes the long view. He plans, he protects, and he seeks to honor God in his decisions. All these elements contribute to the reputation he builds. People don't just respect him because he's strong. They respect him because he's fair, wise, and guided by principles bigger than himself. And let's not forget, David is human. He has flaws. He makes mistakes. But the thing that sets him apart is how he responds to responsibility and opportunity. He consistently seeks to act in alignment with God's will, and that gives his leadership weight. It's one thing to win battles and amass power, but it's another to use that power to serve justice and honor. And David does both, which is why his name carries such significance. Now, connecting it back to the anecdote about Dr. Mudd, it really underscores the point reputation matters, and it's fragile. David worked to build a name that could stand the test of time, while one misstep in history, like Mudd's association with Booth, can overshadow a lifetime. That's why the Bible emphasizes character, wisdom, and integrity alongside achievements. David's victories were real, but so was his commitment to being a just and honorable leader. So when we reflect on this part of David's story, we see a leader who understands the weight of his name. He's not reckless with it, he cultivates it. Every battle, every decision, every act of justice contributes to a legacy of respect and reverence. And there's a lesson there for us. Our actions, choices, and how we treat others impact our reputation, sometimes more than we realize. David's example shows that building a good name requires courage, wisdom, consistency, and a heart aligned with higher principles. In summary, this section of David's story emphasizes the importance of reputation and character. David made himself a name, not just through military victories, but through his commitment to justice, fairness, and integrity. The anecdote of Dr. Samuel Mudd provides a stark contrast, showing how fragile a name can be when associated with wrongdoing. And David's leadership reminds us that true respect comes from combining strength with wisdom, action with principle, and victory with humility. That's how a king or anyone really creates a legacy that lasts. Okay, so let's dive into David's inner circle. Here's his key officials, because this is where things get really interesting. David didn't just conquer nations and leave it at that. He surrounded himself with people he could trust, people who were capable, loyal, and could help him lead effectively. First, there's Joab, the son of Zeruiah. He's basically David's military commander, the guy who leads the army and makes sure that all those campaigns we just talked about actually succeed on the ground. Joab is fierce, strategic, and, well, sometimes a little unpredictable, but David relies on him. Then there's Jehoshaphat, the recorder. He's responsible for keeping track of events, official records, basically documenting what happens during David's reign. Think of him as the historian, the guy making sure that everything is remembered and recorded accurately. It might sound less glamorous than leading armies, but in a kingdom, having someone who tracks everything is absolutely essential. Next up, we have the priests, the sons of Abiathar. They handle spiritual matters, and they play a crucial role in guiding David in the ways of God. David is a king, yes, but he also wants to make sure his decisions align with God's will, so having priests close to him helps with that. It's about wisdom, guidance, and making sure the king's actions are just and honorable. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. Benaiah. Benaiah is over both the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and these are essentially David's elite forces, his bodyguards. And here's the twist: they were primarily Philistines. Wait, Philistines? Yeah, it might seem strange, but during the time David was running from Saul, he spent some time in Philistine territory and earned the loyalty of certain individuals there. These guys weren't just random soldiers, they became fiercely loyal to David, and he trusted them to protect him. And later, his son Solomon, Benaiah in particular, is notable because he exemplifies ultimate loyalty and courage. He's not just a soldier, he's a protector, someone who ensures that David and the kingdom are safe from threats both external and internal. And the spoiler alert, later on, Benaiah will even have to take extreme measures to protect David's line, including dealing with rebellion and treachery. But at this point, his role is clear. He's the guy you want watching your back. And then we can't forget David's own sons, who serve as chief ministers. In the text, it explains that they act as spiritual advisors. They're not priests in the traditional sense because David isn't from the tribe of Levi, but they are deeply involved in governance and providing counsel. It's a family network, but also one built on responsibility, wisdom, and spiritual insight. David ensures that those closest to him are not just loyal, but also competent and capable of carrying out their duties. So when you look at the structure, it's actually pretty brilliant. You have military strength with Joab, strategic record keeping with Jehoshaphat, spiritual guidance with the priests, elite protection with Benaiah and the Philistine forces, and internal counsel with his sons. It's a balance of power, wisdom, and protection. Every angle of leadership is covered. And let's linger a bit on the Philistine soldiers, the Kerethites and Pelethites. These are elite forces, like the special forces of today, highly trained and trusted. David could have been suspicious of them, given they were former enemies, but he recognized their loyalty and skill. It's a fascinating lesson in leadership. Sometimes you need to trust people based on merit and loyalty rather than background alone. These soldiers formed the backbone of David's personal security, ensuring that the king could move and act with confidence. Now, Benaiah's role is particularly compelling because it shows the seriousness of loyalty in David's kingdom. He's not just there for show, he's actively protecting the king, enforcing justice, and ready to act decisively if someone threatens David or his lineage. Later events reveal just how critical his loyalty is, but even in this chapter, you can see the foundation of that trust being built. It's the kind of loyalty that's rare and immensely valuable. And what's really neat about all of this is that it's not just about strength or numbers. David's leadership style is thoughtful. He surrounds himself with people who complement his abilities, who cover different aspects of governance and protection, and who are aligned with the kingdom's values. It's a strategic, almost modern approach to leadership. Choose the right people, empower them, and trust them with responsibility. So, to sum it up, David's key officials aren't just characters in a list, they form an intricate web of leadership. Joab handles military campaigns, Jehoshaphat keeps accurate records, the priests guide spiritually, Benaiah and the elite Philistine forces protect the king, and David's sons provide counsel. It's a balanced, thoughtful structure that reflects David's wisdom as a leader. And through all of it, we see a king who values loyalty, skill, integrity, and the careful stewardship of both power and responsibility. Each official plays a distinct role, And together, they create a system that allows David to lead effectively while staying aligned with God's purposes. Alright, now we get to one of the most touching and beautiful stories in the entire Bible. 2 Samuel chapter 9. This is where we see a completely different side of David. One that's not about battles, conquests, or expanding kingdoms, but about mercy, kindness, and loyalty. And it all starts with a promise. David had made a covenant with his best friend, Jonathan, who, of course, was the son of King Saul. Jonathan recognized God's calling on David's life, and even though he could have sought the throne for himself, he chose to support his friend. Before Jonathan went into battle and ultimately died, he made David promise something important, that David would show kindness to his family, to his descendants. That promise is what sets the stage for this whole chapter, and it's one of those moments that really makes you stop and think about the weight of loyalty and friendship. So fast forward 15 years. David is now firmly established as king. He has victories behind him, a solid kingdom, and resources beyond what most could imagine. And yet, he remembers his promise to Jonathan. This isn't just a casual thought, it's a deliberate search. David wants to find out if anyone is still alive from Saul's household, anyone to whom he can show kindness. And here's the thing that really hits me. David could have easily ignored this. He could have thought, well, that's a long time ago. Jonathan's gone. His family might be gone. It's not relevant now. But he doesn't. He actively seeks to honor his word. That's the kind of integrity that builds a lasting legacy. So, David asks about the family of Saul, and he's told that there is indeed someone still alive, Jonathan's son, who is lame in both feet. And so, David sends for him. This is Mephibosheth, and when he's brought into the presence of the king, the text says he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Pause for a second and imagine that. This is a young man, maybe in his early 20s, who has lived a life of obscurity and limitation. He's been crippled from a fall when he was a child, after his father and grandfather died in battle, and now he's physically unable to walk properly. And yet, despite his injury, despite his vulnerability, he bows down in deep humility and respect before the king. It's a powerful image of reverence, of recognizing authority, and also of vulnerability. It's like he's saying, I am nothing, I am yours to command. And in that moment, we see the human side of him, the real emotional depth. This isn't just a ceremonial bow, it's the culmination of years of fear, uncertainty, and survival. Now, what's incredible is David's response. He says, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan's sake, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather. You shall eat at my table continually." Imagine that. Mephibosheth, who probably felt invisible and forgotten, is being given security, honor, and a place at the king's table. And again, this isn't just a symbolic gesture. David literally restores property, wealth, and status. He brings Mephibosheth into his home, into his family, into the very heart of the kingdom. The depth of this mercy and generosity is staggering because Mephibosheth hasn't done anything to deserve it. There's no repayment, no achievement to justify this. It's pure, unearned kindness. Now, let's step back for a second and consider the backstory. Mephibosheth was just a child, around 5 years old, when the tragic events occurred. Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle against the Philistines. His nurse, trying to protect him from the chaos and potential threat of Saul's enemies, scooped him up and fled. But in the rush and panic, he fell, and the result was a permanent disability that left him lame in both feet. So here he is, 15 years later, still living in a small, obscure town called Lodbar, which literally means emptiness or barren place. The location is telling, isn't it? He's been living in obscurity, away from influence, power, or opportunity, and yet David seeks him out. That contrasts the king at the height of his power, and the descendant of Jonathan living quietly in a barren town is striking. It shows that mercy isn't just about convenience, it's about pursuit, recognition, and honoring promises, even when it's difficult or unexpected. And there's something else here about Mephibosheth's response that's important. When David offers him this generosity, he says something so revealing. "What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" This phrase is full of humility, maybe even self-loathing. He sees himself as lowly, unworthy, perhaps because of his disability or his circumstances. And David's response is not condemnation, not correction, but affirmation and inclusion. This is a moment that's so tender because it flips the usual power dynamic. The king, the one in control, reaches down and lifts someone up, fully restoring them. It's mercy in action. And the phrase, "eat at my table continually," is repeated 3 times in the text. This isn't temporary. This isn't symbolic. It's a lifelong invitation to security, honor, and relationship. And if you think about it, the way David does this is also deeply relational. He doesn't just hand over land or send a letter of restoration. He brings Mephibosheth into his presence. He engages with him directly. He looks him in the eye and makes a personal commitment. This humanizes the king in a way that makes the story resonate even more. David's leadership is not just about politics, it's about compassion, it's about keeping promises, and it's about recognizing the dignity of every individual regardless of their social standing or physical limitations. And the ripple effect of this generosity is evident. The household of Ziba, Saul's former servant, is now working to manage the lands for Mephibosheth. His family and servants are incorporated into the kingdom structure, and Mephibosheth himself is brought into the palace to share in the king's table, effectively elevated to the level of the royal family. The transformation is complete from a life of vulnerability, obscurity, and limitation to one of security, dignity, and inclusion. And it's all done for the sake of a promise David made to Jonathan years before. It's a powerful reminder of loyalty, mercy, and the fulfillment of commitments. And the story of Mephibosheth also has a really relatable human element. How often do we feel invisible, overlooked, or limited by circumstances beyond our control? Maybe we've experienced loss, tragedy, or physical limitations, and it can feel like the world has passed us by. Mephibosheth's story reminds us that mercy, kindness, and restoration can come in unexpected ways. Sometimes it comes through the faithful actions of someone who remembers a promise, who sees worth and potential, and who chooses to act with generosity and love. The contrast between Lodebar, the place of emptiness where he lived, and the palace, the place of abundance and honor, is striking. It's almost cinematic in the way it shows transformation from desolation to restoration, from exclusion to inclusion. And just to add another layer, David's actions here are also a picture of God's mercy for us. Mephibosheth is a lot like humanity. We're all in a way estranged, living in a kind of spiritual Lodebar because of sin and the consequences of the fall. We haven't earned favor, and yet, just as David seeks Mephibosheth out, God seeks us, offering mercy, restoration, and a place at his table through Christ. It's unearned, generous, and deeply personal. And that makes this story resonate not just historically, but spiritually and emotionally. It's about pursuit, love, restoration, and faithfulness. So to sum up, in 2 Samuel 9, we see David actively seeking to show kindness to Jonathan's family. He finds Mephibosheth, a man living in obscurity and limited by injury, and restores him fully land, security, and a place at the king's table. Mephibosheth's humility and David's generosity highlight the themes of mercy, loyalty, and fulfillment of promises. It's a story of transformation, one that reminds us how mercy and kindness can radically change a life, honor commitments, and reflect a deeper, divine pattern of love and restoration that resonates even today. Alright, so now let's look at the deeper meaning behind this story, the typology, and why it's so powerful. When we read about David and Mephibosheth, it's more than just history. It's a picture, a foreshadowing of something much bigger. David, in this story, can be seen as a picture of Christ. Think about it, he's a king, a ruler, someone with authority and power. But he uses that authority for mercy, for restoration, for seeking out someone who can't help himself. That's exactly what Jesus does for us. We're Mephibosheth in this story, living in obscurity, maybe broken or damaged by life, and unable to earn or claim what's being offered. And then the king comes. You know, Mephibosheth's situation really resonates when we look at ourselves. He's lame, vulnerable, and living in Lodebar, a place whose very name means emptiness or barrenness. He's powerless, just trying to survive. And yet David seeks him out. There's no chance that Mephibosheth could make himself worthy of David's favor. That's the point, and that's the beauty of Christ's pursuit of us. We aren't perfect, we haven't earned God's favor, and yet Jesus seeks us, loves us, and invites us into his presence. Just like David sought Mephibosheth, Jesus comes after us even in our most broken, overlooked, or desperate places. And it's not just a passing encounter. David restores Mephibosheth fully land, provision, a place at the table, and ongoing security. It's tangible, it's personal, and it's permanent. That mirrors what Christ does in our lives. He doesn't offer half measures or temporary relief. He offers full restoration, forgiveness, relationship, identity, and a place in his family. And here's the kicker: we can't earn it. Mephibosheth didn't do anything to deserve David's favor, and we haven't done anything to earn God's mercy. It's all grace. That's why this story is so inspiring. It shows mercy in action, not just in theory. And let's talk about that table for a second. The phrase "eat at my table" continually is repeated 3 times. And it's not just about food or luxury, it's about fellowship, acceptance, and inclusion. Mephibosheth, despite his disability and obscure past, is invited into intimate proximity with the king. He's included in family, in privilege, in protection, and that's what Jesus offers to us. He doesn't just forgive and walk away. He invites us into relationship, into communion with him, into a life that's secure and honored in God's kingdom. It's like he's saying, you belong here, you're accepted, you don't have to earn it. Now, think about the contrast. Mephibosheth had been living in barrenness, perhaps feeling forgotten, unseen, and powerless, but David comes and radically changes his situation. Similarly, before we know Christ and we are spiritually in Lodebar, our lives can feel empty, disconnected, or weighed down by sin and brokenness. And just like David sought Mephibosheth, Christ seeks us. He doesn't wait for us to get our act together, doesn't wait for us to become worthy, doesn't wait for us to clean ourselves up first. He sees us, he knows our weaknesses, and he comes after us with mercy and love. And I love how personal this is. David doesn't just restore Mephibosheth to land or wealth, he restores him to presence. That's what Christ does. It's relational, it's intimate, it's a daily, ongoing invitation to participate in God's life and kingdom. And here's the thing, once you're at the table, you're not just a guest, you're family. No, Mephibosheth isn't a servant, he's now part of the king's household. Similarly, in Christ, we move from being outsiders to being children of God, heirs of his promises, participants in his love. Another thing that stands out is the pursuit. David didn't wait for Mephibosheth to come to him, he went looking. And I mean, that's what makes this story so relatable. Sometimes we feel distant from God, feel like he's unreachable, but the truth is, he's the one coming after us. He seeks us where we are, in the mess, the emptiness, the challenges of life. And that's not always easy for us to grasp. We're so used to earning things, to striving, to thinking we have to prove ourselves. But the table, the invitation, the mercy, it's all because of God's initiative, not ours. That's grace. And let's just pause for a second and reflect on Mephibosheth's humility. He bows, he prostrates himself, he acknowledges his own weakness, his own unworthiness. And you know what? That's a posture that invites mercy. When we come to Christ, there's no hiding, there's no pretending. The humility and honesty in recognizing our need is the doorway into the life he offers. And Christ meets us there, in our humility, and lifts us into relationship just like David did with Mephibosheth. And the story also shows transformation. Before, Mephibosheth's life was defined by limitations, by scarcity, by being overlooked. After, he's defined by presence, provision, and honor. That's exactly what happens spiritually when we accept Christ's mercy. Our lives are transformed not just in our circumstances, but in identity, purpose, and relational standing with God. The change is holistic, permanent, and profound. It's not just a fix for today, it's a promise for forever. And here's a little thing I love. Notice how specific David is in restoring Mephibosheth. He restores the land of Saul, ensures the household works it for him, and repeatedly confirms that he will eat at the king's table. There's no vagueness, no ambiguity. God's mercy in Christ is similarly precise and purposeful. It's not general, it's intentional. It's not temporary, it's eternal. Every detail matters because the king himself is involved, and he cares about the wholeness of the person, not just a part of them. And this is the part that really hits home for many of us. Mephibosheth represents humanity broken, powerless, overlooked, dependent on someone else's mercy. David represents Christ sovereign, powerful, and yet merciful, actively seeking out the one in need. It's a vivid, tangible way to understand the gospel. Jesus doesn't just forgive sin, he restores us to himself. He invites us into his presence, and he provides what we could never earn on our own. And the story makes it clear that this is rooted in love and promise. David keeps his word to Jonathan, not because Mephibosheth earned it, but because love is faithful. And Christ's pursuit of us is the ultimate expression of that faithfulness. And there's a kind of emotional weight to it too. Imagine Mephibosheth living years of obscurity, perhaps thinking he'd never know security, safety, or honor. And then suddenly, the king calls him, restores him, gives him a place at the table. That's the kind of hope that resonates deeply with all of us. Spiritually, it's like God saying, I see you, I value you, I'm calling you into my life, into my family, and you don't have to earn it. I've already paid the price. I'm inviting you into fellowship and restoration. So as we reflect on this, the story isn't just ancient history, it's an invitation. It's an illustration of the gospel, a story that helps us grasp the depth of Christ's mercy. We're Mephibosheth, we're broken, overlooked, and powerless, and yet the king seeks us out, restores us, and invites us to feast at his table. It's grace in action, mercy made tangible, and love shown through intentional pursuit. And the beauty is that this invitation is available to everyone, regardless of past mistakes, limitations, or failures. The king's mercy is active, personal, and transforming, and that's why this typology is so compelling. David's mercy towards Mephibosheth isn't just a nice story, it's a living picture of how Christ relates to us. It's relational, personal, deliberate, and generous. It shows that God pursues us, restores us fully, and offers inclusion in his presence. Not because we've earned it, but because his love is faithful and his mercy is unending. That's the heart of the gospel, wrapped up in this beautiful, human, deeply relatable story. So, there you have it. The story of David and Mephibosheth is more than history. It's a picture of mercy, pursuit, and restoration. It reminds us that the king seeks us, even in our brokenness, and invites us into his presence. Take a moment to reflect on that kindness and what it means for your own life. If this story spoke to you, consider liking the video and subscribing so you can explore more stories like this and see how these timeless lessons apply today.